What's up, everyone? My name is Jeff. This is Jeff Brown Tech, and today I want to go over an article I came across a few months ago talking about PowerShell scripting performance considerations. It's a very interesting topic, and it goes into some instances where using PowerShell as it is or diving in directly into .NET classes and methods might be a little bit faster and better, even though it breaks or doesn't follow some of the PowerShell practices that you should be following. I'm not going to go through every example that it has in here. I'm just going to highlight two or three that I think are really important in considering when you're writing your own scripts, and it might help improve your performance as you're writing larger scripts that might be doing lots of things repeatedly. Let's go ahead and get started. I will definitely include a link to this article down in the video description so you can check out the other examples that they have. But first, I do want to just go over the introductory paragraph here where it talks about PowerShell can leverage .NET directly, and avoiding the pipeline can be faster than using Idiomatic PowerShell. Idiomatic PowerShell just means you're using commandlets and PowerShell functions and leveraging the pipeline and everything like that. Basically, you're using PowerShell like it should be used and not accessing .NET directly. I did a video series talking about getting started with scripting and did mention you could access these .NET classes and methods and everything like that directly, but it's not how you would expect PowerShell to be written. In fact, this note goes over that a little bit more, saying it might reduce the readability of a PowerShell script. Someone who's not familiar with those .NET classes and everything or using .NET might see it and not know exactly what it is if the only language they know is PowerShell. The article continues saying, as you're writing a script, you should stick with Idiomatic PowerShell and only use .NET directly if it helps you improve your performance. The first one I want to go over is talking about array addition. Now, again, I did a video series on moving from command line to PowerShell scripting. We talked about arrays and how if you need to add items to an array, what you might typically see first is this method here. You have an empty array, and then you start using plus equal. Maybe it's an object. Maybe you're getting the result of a command. In this case, you're getting the result of a command. But this can actually be really slow and decrease performance if you're using it in a large collection. In that same course, however, I did mention in PowerShell 7.5, there were some improvements, and this array addition was optimized, and it no longer creates a new array for each operation. That's why it takes so long, because you're not actually just adding something to an array. You're copying the array with a new item to it. And as that array gets bigger and bigger and bigger, your performance can decrease. If you're on PowerShell 7.5 or later, this doesn't do this anymore, and the performance is actually pretty fine. We'll actually see that here in just a second. There are a couple of alternatives. If you're not using PowerShell 7.5 or higher, there are some alternatives to using array addition like this. One of them is creating a generic list where you can then do add range. And this is where you're accessing .NET directly to create this type of object. And this will improve your performance a little bit. We do have some tests here we can run. I'll come back to this in just a second here, because I want to go over a couple other things about arrays. Actually, when you're using a list object, you have to specify exactly what type of variable or object or data type is going to be in there. In this case, you're saying int. This list is going to only hold ints or integers. So we're adding 1, then we're adding 2, but this is actually a string. That's not, that's a real number or a decimal number. And then you have 4, another string here. As you can see, when it gets to 4, it can't convert that over. So actually, it probably does take these just fine and converts them into integers, but taking something like 4 where it's spelled out, that is not going to work because it's only expecting integers. If you do need your list here to contain different types of objects or data types in it, you can just set the object type or the data type to object. And in this case, we have the number 1 integer, a string, decimal number, and that is fine. And it goes through or in this case, it's a double. It will add those and you can mix those in there all together. Now let's go back and actually compare the performance of these different methods here. They have some example code here that you can actually run and check this out. First, this is just a PowerShell explicit assignment. We're adding each of these numbers directly into our assignment here, and no array addition or anything like that. In this case, we're adding an item to the list here. We're going to go through various collection sizes here and just add that to our collection. And in this case, we're going to do the same thing, and we're using the plus equal, which typically historically has been a lot slower. All right, let me copy this code here, and let's actually jump out to a PowerShell console window. Here we are. I did want to point out I am on 7.5 or higher here when we run this code. You might be at a lower version or you're using Windows PowerShell. I'm going to go ahead and paste this in, and let's go ahead and run it. It is pretty quick. It only takes maybe a few seconds here, but we'll fast forward if we need to. All right, here we go. That is all done. Let's go take a look at our results. We do have our different collection sizes here. I'm just going to divvy these up. So looking at 5120 for our collection size, interestingly enough here, the plus equal operator was the fastest. I ran this earlier, and that wasn't the case. The PowerShell explicit assignment was the fastest here, but this time it's not too much of a difference there in milliseconds. Again, you can run this on your system, and it might be, you'll probably get different results. But in this case, as we increase the collection size here, the PowerShell explicit assignment got faster. We can see it's the 1x speed in relation to the other examples we have here. The plus equal operator is still faster than adding an item to our list. In fact, that was quite a bit slower. But as we get to a very large collection here, we can see this. The plus equal operator to the array is the slowest and got a lot slower. Again, if I were to run this, I might get different results. Again, it depends on your system, depends what else is running. And in fact, what I want to do is, let me go back and copy this again, make sure it's in my clipboard. And let's open up PowerShell, Windows PowerShell 5.1. I've got PS version table, and we are at 5.1. So let's clear this, and we'll paste in our code again. It's going to start running. Now, this is actually going to take a while because we can immediately see here on our smaller collection sizes, PowerShell explicit assignment was pretty quick. In this case, this is what is expected. Adding an item to the list is also relatively quick in comparison. And then the plus equal operator took a lot longer, 93 times than just our baseline here. And again, as our collection is getting bigger, this plus equal operator to the array is getting slower and slower. So just pointing out, if you're still using Windows PowerShell 5.1 or lower, or you're using PowerShell core, but it's less than 7.5 in your environment, or maybe you're running this in a function or automation runbook or something like that, the plus equal operator is going to be so much slower. In fact, let me clear this out. This is still running, and it's still running on our larger collection size, and it's going to take a few minutes. So we're actually going to let this keep running, and we'll come back to it and see what it looks like. Okay, I paused the video there, the recording, for just a few minutes so this could finish up, and we can actually see as we got to these larger and larger collection size, you can see again how much slower the plus equal operator. It's 41,000 times slower than our baseline here for just explicit assignment, and then even adding to the list. So again, using older versions of PowerShell, keep this in mind if you're getting into very large collections, adding to them or anything like that. You'll definitely want to investigate this and use this. Okay, back to our article here. The next one I want to go over is talking about suppressing output. Now, you might run a command, or you're adding to an array or something like that, and you want to avoid writing an object to the pipeline. There are 3 different ways we can do this. We can assign the output of the command to, or file redirection to $null. That's an automatic variable inside of PowerShell. You don't have to define it. You can cast it to void, or the PowerShell way, the idiomatic way you would say, is pipe it out to null. However, there is performance and speed differences in using each of these. One for $null, casting to void, or file redirection to null. Those are all the same, pretty similar. However, piping it out to null in a large loop can be very slow, especially in PowerShell 5.1, like it says. So what does that look like here? Let's go take a look at our code example. We are adding an array, or we're adding an item to an array, and then piping this out, or assigning this to the null to suppress that output. In this case, we are using void or casting that to void. In this example, we're redirecting to null. And in this example, this would be the PowerShell way to do it. You're piping it to out null. Now, why would you want to maybe do something like this? Let's actually take this. I'm going to just copy our array definition. Let me show you exactly what we're suppressing here. Back out in our PowerShell 7 window, let me clear the screen. I'm going to define the array here. Earlier, when we were talking about array addition, we were looking more at generic list and everything. In this case, we're creating an array list in order to add to it. So what I've got here is if you have an array list and then you're going to add something to it, you can see my previous examples there. Let's just say I'm going to add the string test to it. What it does is it will output the index that you just added to. Now, maybe you don't want to put this in your PowerShell pipeline, or maybe you don't want it to appear on the screen. You would want to suppress that. So let me do this a couple more times. You can keep seeing I've got my different indexes there. And if I were just look at array list, there's all my entries. And there's a couple of different ways to suppress that output like we've talked about. Let's bring this back up. You can say null equals. So anything that is a result of your add command here just gets assigned to null and you don't see it anymore. We can also go this way and redirect it to null. We can also do void. As you can see, we're not seeing those numbers anytime that pops up. Or we can go here and again, the PowerShell way to do it is to pipe it out to out null and it suppresses that output. But as we're going to see, these have different performance considerations. So let's copy this. Let's go back into PowerShell 7.1 here. We'll paste this in and see our results here. Perfect. That only took a few seconds here. So let's divvy this up just so we can see our different collection sizes here. As the article mentioned, these top three here, assigning it to null, redirecting it to null, or casting to void, all pretty quick on this small collection here. In last place is piping it to out null. Still not too bad for this small collection, but again, as our collections get bigger, casting to void, assigning or redirecting 1x, 1.02, 1.04, but now piping it to out null is 1.5 times slower. And as our very, very large collection here, those are all still about the same performance. And again, this actually got a little better on our bigger collection here at 1.46. Again, these here in this example, not huge difference in the speed there, not like we saw with the array addition. But this is an example where using PowerShell idiomatic practices and everything the way you would expect to use PowerShell is actually slower. If you're working with a large collection, you might look at, and you want to suppress that output in this case, go ahead and look at one of these top three methods here. The last one I want to take a look at here is avoid wrapping commandlet pipelines. Let's go take a look and see what this is talking about. In this case, if you've been working with PowerShell, you can take a command, use the pipeline to pipe it over to another command. Maybe you're doing get process and then stop process, get items, remove items, anything like that. That's the power of PowerShell, is working with the pipelines and sending objects in between those. The article here talks about initializing a new pipeline can be expensive. Therefore, you should avoid wrapping a commandlet pipeline in another existing pipeline. What do they mean by this? Let's say you have an input file here, input CSV. It has 2100 lines in it, and you want to process something in that file and then export it to another file or a new file called using export CSV. In this case, what we're doing here, we're going to measure our command, but what we're focused on here is this portion of it. So what we're doing is we're importing the CSV, we're saying for each object, and then we're creating this PS custom object here. And then within this for each loop, essentially in the current pipeline portion of it, we're then piping that out to export CSV, and we're appending to the file. So each time we go through each of these objects, we're going to pipe that out to export CSV and add a line to our file. And you can see the results here when this command is wrapped inside of here. It's just shy of 16,000 milliseconds. This is what ran on their system. You could do the same thing. It would be slightly different. However, let's look at a slightly better way of doing this where you don't wrap it inside of there. In this case, we have our entire command here, import CSV, and this portion of it. And then afterwards, you pipe it to export CSV out to your CSV file. Notice we don't have dash append here because what we're doing is we're processing the entire CSV file. We're creating this custom object and we're letting PowerShell do that in the pipeline there once, going through doing that over and over and over. Then it takes that entire result of the pipeline and then sends it to export CSV and create your file. And you can see this is a lot faster. It's less than 50 milliseconds here. And with the example, it's 372 times faster when they ran it. So going back, let's see if I can get both of these on the screen here. It is hard to see just a little bit here. What I want to point out is the export CSV is inside these curly brackets here. And you're adding to it, it's on this line. And just by moving this down to where it's outside of these curly brackets here inside of your process, that you're processing all this and then piping it there is what makes it a lot faster. You might not always recognize this when you're writing a PowerShell command or a script or anything like that, but just something to think about is how are you processing something? And then if you're piping that in the, calling another command in your pipeline, how could you maybe do it slightly more efficiently? Anyway, that's the primary things I wanted to go over. I thought the array addition was very interesting. And then, suppressing your output, those are two of the things I see most often or that I use when I'm writing scripts that help me out. Lots of other great ones in here about using write host carefully, very straightforward. Again, you don't want to use write host that often. You should only use it when you want to write formatted text to the console instead of putting it out into the pipeline. And what it is just pointing out here is write host can be slower than using console write line, but it's only for specific hosts. But this isn't guaranteed to work on all hosts that you have, probably like Linux or maybe a different operating system or something like that. And you're not going to catch that if you use start transcript. And if actually, I don't know if I've ever seen write line or anything like this. It's just better off to use write host sparingly. Anyway, hopefully this is helpful. Definitely an interesting article if you really want to get into the minutiae or details of writing PowerShell scripts and making sure your performance is really good. Again, the link will be down in the video description, and hopefully this helps you on your script writing journey. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.